Well, hey there, and welcome to another live episode of My Counselor Online. My name is Matthew Thrower, and I have the honor of hosting today's episode. I want to introduce you to our special guest and one of our counselors here at MCO, Sarah Cowan. Sarah, how are you today?
Hi, Matthew. I am doing great, and it's just such an honor and privilege to be back here with you guys.
Awesome. Well, we are glad that you're with us on today's episode. Before we dive in, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience and just tell the viewers a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Sarah, and I have been a clinician and in the mental health field for over 10 years now. I'm just so passionate about marriage and family and just healthy living, whether, kind of from a holistic scale that's both emotionally, relationally, spiritually, and physically. And so I'm very excited to be able to be here and use both my experiences personally as well as professionally to help our viewers today and connect with them.
Yeah, and I'm excited about you sharing the article that you just wrote. I think it's very needed for our culture today. And being married for almost 18 years, I thoroughly enjoyed it. Your article that you wrote is called Going the Distance: 5 Strategies for Maintaining Intimacy and Connection in Your Relationship. Like I said, I've been married for a little bit and I've counseled through some couples as a pastor. I absolutely loved your insight and plan on passing this along to many in the future. So let's talk about it. What inspired you to write this article?
Yeah. Oh, well, one, I just have to say I'm so glad to hear that it just touched your heart and that you can pass this
Mhm.
information along. Because part of what inspired me is seeing how hungry couples and even young people who are preparing for, a life together with their loved one, how hungry they are for intimacy and connection and being successful in their relationship. One of in my past life, I actually was an adjunct professor for a psychology department at a university, and I had the privilege of teaching and leading classes for 6 semesters. And one of the classes I was most passionate about was the intimate relationships class. And we always began the class each semester by asking all the students to pull out an index card and write down what they really wanted to learn. Why were you in this class? Aside from just needing a credit for their degree, of course. And
Right.
almost the majority of the students every year ask, why do some relationships fail and some succeed? How can we be successful in this and avoid all the hurt and the heartache? And that just stuck with me, especially being a child of a family of divorce. I recognize how hard it is and how I saw my parents firsthand, how hard they worked to be successful and stay together. And so sometimes the resources are hard to tap into. When we try to read books and we try to get information, we go to counseling, and we really just want so desperately to connect with our partner. And so from my experience in my profession, I have found through research that while these are not every, tried and true tactic, and there's so many other various ways that someone can maintain their intimacy, these are 5 very solid strategies to help a relationship stay healthy and intimate. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So you've already answered the question of who this article is written for. And I appreciate you saying that because, in our culture today, so many, like you mentioned your own story, you've seen marriages fail. I've seen relationships fail, marriages fail. And, your strategies that you mentioned in here are incredible boundaries for us to have in any relationship. And I want to get into those strategies that you mentioned. You shared 5 strategies for maintaining connection in the relationship. Walk us through these strategies and tell us a little bit about them.
Yes, I'd love to. So the first strategy is what I call shared activities, but that's through a special process called self-expansion. Self-expansion is like deep wired into us as human beings. We like to grow and to expand ourselves and our knowledge and be successful. And one of the ways that researchers have found that we expand ourselves and our intellect is through our intimate relationships. And so if you think about the very beginning of when you're dating and talking to someone, oh, it's so exciting and new. And you spend hours on the phone and coffee dates and talking. and doing activities together and really soaking in these new experiences and information from this special person. And that is not just because of the butterflies and the love that you're developing, but that's also because it's fulfilling to us as a person to gather new information and experiences. It helps to round out our personhood, I guess you could say. And so it's no surprise that after we've developed our relationship, we've settled down, we start to get in a routine, and routine is beautiful, but it can get monotonous. And next thing you know, like you have couples and they're just striving to find conversation. They feel like they're going into autopilot because they think or feel as though they know so much about that person already. And so one of the ways to really help develop, and not just develop, but maintain that self-expansion together is doing new and novel activities, continuing to date, continuing to grow, trying to not settle down into too much monotony. And while everyone thinks dating has to cost a lot of money, while going out to new restaurants and traveling to see new cultures is wonderful and a great way to expand your knowledge of the world together, it's just as easy to play games and to go on hikes and get outdoors, to go kayaking, to read books together and do puzzles. Fun nerd alert, my husband and I and another couple, I don't know who is familiar with the Pokemon game that came out on their phones years ago, but several couples in our group, we just said, hey, what is this all about? Let's check it out. And that was something fun we did for a little while just to change up the game, to be able to find new activities and get out. And it's kind of out of your comfort zone. It's not your normal thing, but it gives you a good laugh. And whether you like it or not, it helps create a memory that you can then go back to as a couple and laugh about and share. And it helps to kind of build where you're going. So that's a really
Yeah,
important one.
no, that's good. I loved it because it's the idea of constantly learning and growing together. I'm always like trying to connect things, with our relationship with God, as a pastor, and that's the same thing as us as believers. We always are striving to learn more about Him. How much more should we be doing that in the cultivation of our relationships? So yeah, I really appreciated that. Let's keep going. What's the next one?
So the next one is social support. And on one hand, that's great to have like shared friends and loved ones and family members and people in your circle that you again get to share activities with and feel supported by, especially to know that they support your marriage and your relationship. But social support goes a little bit deeper with how you and your spouse connect and support one another. And an easy way to think about this is when life gets stressful, not if, but when life gets stressful, that's your other person, that's your helpmeet that God has given you and designed for you. So you want to be able to step into that role and provide support and resources when the stress kind of weighs down on your loved one. And so many of us think that we're being helpful in very like explicit ways. But what my article kind of talks about is this idea of invisible support. We've researched this in the psychology field and found that visible support is really awesome, but it sometimes can backfire, whereas invisible support is tried and true and is probably not going to backfire there. So for example, if I am working throughout the day and I'm stressed, I have deadlines, I'm feeling a little weighed down, I have a house to clean later, and I'm just thinking, oh my goodness, I'm not going to get off until 9 o'clock. I still have to empty the dishwasher and cook dinner, and I'm just feeling very heavy. If I were to walk in at home and my husband, which he has done this numerous times because he's just a gem in my life, but if he has just didn't even ask me, didn't text me ahead of time to ask, hey, should I help you by doing this? Which I would have politely declined because that's something I do the dishwasher best, right? Instead, I come home and it's just done and dinner's ready. And I didn't have to be asked. I didn't feel like I was failing as a wife in that moment by him having to ask me what's for dinner. He just stepped in and invisibly supported me in that way. And instead, I feel this relief when I come home because I feel supported and loved and seen. That attachment is just so prevalent right there, where I'm attached and seen and cared for in those vulnerable moments where I might have wanted to be better and reached a certain standard of what I think I should do as a wife and a working woman. And instead he says, I'm here, I've got you. So that's one example of invisible support.
Yeah. So how could that have gone wrong if it was visible support? You know,
Yeah.
husband says, I loaded the dishwasher, I unloaded it, I cooked dinner. You know, so how does that come into play?
Yeah, so visible support might look like someone saying, hey, one of the examples I actually give in my article is like, hey, I know you're going to go on a diet. So I stopped buying sugar and I bought all these things and I've got some Slim Fast for you. Well, dang, like now there's that part of
Right.
me that feels very like exposed. I might not be feeling great about myself. Yes, it might be something that I wanted to do, but then to like have that like very visible support, I didn't get to be a part of that decision. And it just can backfire as far as like the house cleaning and chores and things. That could have been where I got a text in the middle of my already busy workday asking like, hey, there's no clean laundry. Like, where am I supposed to find this? Do you want me to run this? Well, now in my mind, I have this expectation that that was something I was going to do and I failed. And now he's having to
Mm,
come and ask me. And so we can get in our own head. Goes far beyond, um, gender roles of who does what in the house. This is just
right.
each person can have an expectation on themselves of what they wanted or hope to be able to accomplish. And that's just a reminder visibly by him having to ask me, hey, should I run the
Mm,
laundry? I see you didn't get it done today. He's offering, he probably means nothing by it, but in my head, I'm now beating myself up and frustrated, and I feel helpless to do that. Whereas if he
mm,
just does it and sees that, he's a part of the team and I'm not having to worry about getting in my own head, it kind of takes out the extra stress and allows me to take in his support and his care.
That's good. That's
Mhm.
good. So the third one, capitalization. Talk to us about that one.
Yes, capitalization. I love this because this just happens literally in everyday life.
Mm,
When we come home and we share about our day with our loved one, we might have something really heavy or really great that happens. And instead of being on our phone or being caught up in our own world, we get to capitalize on the opportunity to connect with our spouse. And there's a few different methods to do this. What I recommend is that we use a positive, an active, constructive method. That's basically saying, hey, I'm going to stop and give you my attention. I'm going to show you that I'm listening. And I'm really going to like side with what you're describing to me. I'm going to side with the story that you're sharing. I'm not going to give my input on my feedback right now. I'm just going to be there with you in this moment. Whereas something that might be a passive or deconstructive method of responding to your partner's news and conversation is where you kind of like hijack the conversation, start
mm-hmm,
giving your input, or even just kind of blowing it off, which is really like deconstructive to the connection. And so if someone comes home and they want to share about like, hey, I actually like someone thanked me today for what I did at work, and that felt really good. By capitalizing on that moment, you get to really like celebrate that with your partner and say like, oh my gosh, that must have felt so good. Like, I'm actually
mm-hmm,
really proud of you. Like, of course they said that to you. You're awesome at that. Are you surprised? Like, you really like dive into that moment with them and
mm-hmm.
capitalize on those opportunities to connect and share as each other's best friend. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Um, Forgiveness. The tough
forgiveness.
one.
Ooh, this could be an episode in itself. So,
Right. Yeah, we could probably spend 30 minutes here, but
exactly.
yeah.
So, forgiveness is for ourselves, right? And the Lord even uses, and if we look at scripture, He tells us like it's so important to forgive and to not have that wall up that prevents us from connecting and growing and having like a deeper relationship with the Lord, which,
Mm,
like you said earlier, that mimics if we have a block with the Lord and unforgiveness, why would we not have a block with our partner with our
right.
unforgiveness? So this one can get tricky because every relationship will go through hardships and hard
Mm-hmm.
times. Some of the harder ones might be betrayals and infidelity and lies and deceit. And others might just be moments that create like some discomfort and a little bit of resentment that we have to work through. So there's different layers of what we have to forgive in our relationships. However, it's really important, excuse me, it's really important to remember that forgiveness helps to open those pathways back up to one another. We cannot connect and bond and be intimate when there's a breeding ground for resentment and bitterness and being closed off, for being untrusting of the one person that's supposed to be in our corner. And so forgiveness is essential to having an intimate relationship so that you can continue that growth and connection. And not only that, but if we think of this from an attachment mindset, we can attach and feel safe and seen if there's this narrative going through our mind that that person's not trustworthy or they hurt us and there's no going back to them now. Like that actually breaks the attachment that we have securely with them. And so it's very important for us to be able to go through the steps to navigate forgiveness. And that might be with a professional, that might be with a pastor, but it's so essential and honestly one of the more important ones of these five, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. The thing for me, the perspective I have is that if I have unforgiveness and I choose not to forgive either myself or whomever's wronged me, I'm really putting my feet in the shoes of God, and they don't really fit. If God's forgiven me or if God's forgiven the person, who am I to bear that weight of unforgiveness?
Exactly. So well
Yeah.
said. Yeah. And in my article, I outline a few tips to like things that might make forgiveness a little bit easier. Certainly if the offense is, a little bit lighter than something like a betrayal or infidelity, then it might be easier to forgive. So I have a few things outlined in my article to help with that. And like I said, we could probably spend a lot of time here. So if the viewers are ever interested, we'd love to hear if this would be a topic for the future.
Right. I'm sure it is. So let's get into the last one.
Sexual satisfaction, right? How
Mm-hmm.
can we have an intimate relationship with our partner without this important, piece of the relationship?
Right.
Sexual satisfaction and physical intimacy, because we think of intimacy on a scale, there's multiple facets of intimacy, but this one is sexual and physical. And it's the part that separates our relationship from just a friendship or cohabiting with a best friend. This is the sacred act of connecting and sharing vulnerability and closeness in a physical and sexual way as God designed and ordained within the confines of a healthy marriage. And research finds there's this back and forth among sexual satisfaction and good communication and closeness. Sometimes we wonder in the research, well, does a couple with good communication have a better sex life? Because they find that can correlate together. But then there's the question of, well, if you're sexually satisfied and you're engaging together, doesn't that mean that you can have a good, close relationship with great communication? It's kind of like what comes first, the chicken or the egg. At the end of the day, they're very important and they go hand in hand. And we can't talk about an intimate relationship that can go the distance, that can be guarded and protected from outside distractions and temptations if sexual satisfaction is not present right here in the relationship, in the marriage.
Whew, that's so good. Really good. So let's maybe talk to somebody who's struggling maintaining intimacy in their marriage relationship. What's a final piece of advice you'd give to someone?
Yes. So I think every relationship at some point in their life, because we're human and we're not perfect, they will be struggling and feeling like they're starting to tap into that autopilot phase. So the advice that I would give is say you're not alone. The life that we live together is going to feel like a little roller coaster. There's going to be the ups and downs. Hold your ground. Get yourself rooted in what God's truth is for you and your partner and how like you came together and the love you share. Go back to those early days of what drew you together. Go back to some of these strategies, see what you might be missing, see what you can practically employ. And don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help, whether that's a counselor at MCO or somewhere near you, or whether that's through mentors in your church or just with your partner, right? That's the best place to be able to open up and to share and let them know, like, hey, I'm missing our connection. I'm missing the intimacy we once had. And I know we just need to figure this out together. Like, who better to go to than your partner that is sharing all of this with you? So I would just really like to affirm all those couples out there to say, like, go the distance. There's going to be ups and downs. It's not a straight linear path all the time. But you've got this, you're rooted, and the Lord has provided all the resources out there to help you have a successful and healthy, intimate relationship.
Yeah, as a friend of mine used to say, you got to work to see it work. I mean,
That's
it's
right.
so good. It's so good, and I thank you so much for sharing your article with us. The article is going to be in the show notes below, so I want to encourage you to go read it, go share it with your family and friends. Thank you, Sarah, for writing that. One of the things we love to do here at MCO on our live episodes is talk about a trending topic. And today I'm going to ask you about spiritual abuse. You know, we could probably, again, make a whole episode
Sure.
just off this one topic. And I'm looking forward to hearing it from a clinician's perspective on this topic. So talk to us and tell us, what is spiritual abuse?
Yeah, spiritual abuse. Ooh, it's so important to be able to name this. In our field,
Mm,
we kind of use the language, we have to name it to tame it, because it's
right.
very prevalent. It's another form of emotional and psychological abuse that can happen, whether that's through a religious organization or a personal relationship. This is
Hmm.
not specific to only a church or religious organization setting. And it's any form of abuse or manipulation that might use sacred texts, that might use a spiritual relationship and leadership to exert power and control over a person, to manipulate, or really even just to take away from like your personhood, like who you are as a
Mm,
spiritual being and the identity that God has said you have. So spiritual abuse can come in so many forms because of that. It's a broad definition, but it can be very sly and sneaky in how it's used. It takes time sometimes, um,
mm.
but it's important for us to be able to name that.
Yeah. So it takes time. You know, it is sneaky. I totally agree with everything you just said. Um, but tell us, what are some of the warning signs? How would I know if I'm either being spiritually abused or seeing somebody that's being spiritually abused?
Yes, of course. So um, often, like the first one I want to go to that can be clear is anytime that a sacred text is used to kind of manipulate and take advantage. Um,
Mm,
we always, if we're talking, just biblically here,
mhm,
yes, scriptures can be open to interpretation. The Holy Spirit can give us, guidance to like make them come alive. But when they start being taken out of context, to give the abuser the power and control to intimidate you, to manipulate
mm,
you, that's a good warning sign when you start to feel that way, that something that doesn't feel like God's word, that doesn't feel like God's truth in my life. And I
mhm,
actually feel shamed. So maybe even if I can rephrase that, a good warning sign is if you begin to feel shamed, because
mm,
God will convict as a loving father, but he does not condemn and create shame. In fact, shame isolates us from God. We can go all the way back
mhm.
to Adam and Eve in the garden, right? It wasn't the sin
That's
as
right.
much as the shame that pulled them away from God.
Right.
So if you begin to feel ashamed through the use of religious teachings and spiritual guidance, then that's a good warning sign to say, hey, I need to step away and talk to someone and see, what is the shame about? What's this actually coming from? Because you might be being taken advantage of spiritually.
Mhm,
Um, Another warning sign is if you feel through like spiritual leadership or again, teachings, that you're feeling forced, pressured, obligated to do things against your will, whether that's emotionally, physically, sexually. That's a great warning sign. That's pretty cut and dry
mhm.
there, but it can be sneaky in how you get to that place. So that's the important part of just when you start to notice these warning signs of saying like, I feel like I'm losing my control. I'm losing my voice. I'm feeling obligated to do things that don't feel true of who I am. Again, that taking away of your personhood and your right to make your own decisions and connect with God yourself to be able to hear from his voice. You don't need someone else you don't need to go through someone else to hear. So if you're beginning to feel pushed into a corner and your own voice and ability to connect with God taken away, that's another great warning sign.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, because
Mhm.
that was the religious establishment of Jesus's days. You know, we are the gatekeepers. You know, go through us, and they're always trying to isolate people, you know, from entering the presence of God. So that's really good. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Um, what if
I would love
somebody
to
is?
add one more thing to
Oh,
that
go
on
ahead, please.
that is
Yeah.
important. So we're talking about this in the form of like a religious organization. But when I mentioned that this can happen personally as well,
Hmm.
if we think of domestic violence, this can definitely show up in a domestic violence case where,
Right.
again, like the spiritual leader of my home or what I'm teaching, or how
Mm.
we're using the scripture to condone the acts that are being done to take away one's identity, to control them, to even physically and sexually harm them. Um,
Hmm.
so it can show up in those contexts as well. And so I think that's an important
Right.
place to kind of draw that line and say, here's another example of how this can show up, whether it's through work, your own relationship that might be toxic and unhealthy at this point, whether it's a mentor. It's really important to see that this can happen outside of the context of the church, and that people can sometimes get burned out. Pastors in the
Hmm.
church can get burned out and they start to begin pressuring to perform, um,
Hmm.
to say, hey, we've got to do this. This is an important ministry. But when your own boundaries and your own self-care starts getting sacrificed for the mission and the work, right? We have to step back and say that could be a form of spiritual abuse as well, not intentional, maybe just through burned out leaders. Um, because that means you're losing your identity as a child of God. You're not just a
Hmm.
vessel and a performer and a worker. You're a child of God that has to be well taken care of too. So that's another way spiritual abuse can casually enter the scene as well.
Yes, it's very possible to have self spiritual abuse, is what I'm hearing from you. And that's so good. And I think it goes back to what you're saying. It's because this little joker is sneaky. It can present itself in many different ways. But what if somebody is being spiritually abused? What can they do?
Yeah. Well, one, I just have to say, someone's wondering that. Um, Kudos to you. It's so important to
Hmm.
be able to name it, but it's terrifying because so much of who we are, we're spiritual beings. We usually are so connected to our leaders or our church organizations or loved ones. And so to even question, am I being spiritually abused? Like that's scary to think of what might I lose in that process. Am I going to
Hmm.
lose my organization? Are people going to question me and doubt me? Is this right? These questions I'm having. So I would encourage someone to, again, don't let shame and guilt take you to this place of isolation. Reach out, find someone that you do trust, whether that's a clinician, like a Christian counselor who can talk to you and help kind of dissect and help you understand what is it you're feeling and how can we get you cared for. Maybe that's through another leader in your organization or a loved one. So my biggest encouragement is just speak up. It doesn't have to be loud and public, but don't be alone in this. You don't have to, because you
Hmm.
deserve health and healing so that one, your spiritual care is not, put on the back burner. And so that your relationship with God or the loved ones or the other spiritual mentors and friends around you, that so that you don't end up getting disconnected from those good relationships too. So don't isolate, speak up, reach out. You don't have to have all the answers, but there are people around you that love you and care for you that can help you navigate, what you need to do to get cared for.
Yeah, that's good. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Sarah, we're going to transition into our Q&A. And here at MCO, we love to answer your questions that you submit to us. And I actually have a couple of questions that were already submitted to us that we're going to go ahead and ask and answer and dive into. Before I do that, I want to encourage you, if you're watching or listening, and you have a question, you can submit it to us, and it could be answered on a future episode of MCO Live. You can do that by going to MyCounselor.Online/ask. And we would love for you to do that because we love getting your questions and we actually love to answer them. So we have a couple of good questions, and I can't wait to get into these. The first question is, there was a full disclosure under the guidance of a therapist, and the betrayer reveals he has had communication with the affair partner.
Mm.
What should I do?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a big one, because what we know is that full disclosure usually occurs in a situation where there's a couple with infidelity, an affair, something that, a deep betrayal. And so full disclosure through the guidance of a therapist at MyCounselor.Online is the process of helping bring out the truth, as painful as it might be, so that we know what we're working with, and so that a couple can figure out what their healing path looks like through the guidance of their therapist. So to hear that in that full disclosure that their partner who, instigated and was the betrayer in the relationship, to say that they were still in communication with the other party, that's like another level of betrayal, to say, like, here we are in therapy, we're trying to heal, and you're telling me that you've still been talking to them. Like, just take the knife and twist it. So for that viewer right now, like, my heart goes out to you. But I'm also grateful that this has happened under the guidance of a therapist, because they are there to help create safety. Your therapist is there to help navigate, not if, but when these hard things come up. And so first and foremost, I would say reach out to that therapist, reach out to them. You don't have to always have your session with your partner present. It is really important that if you need that time alone with your therapist to share what this has meant to you and how that felt, how that was really blindsiding on another level, talk to them, let them know what that's like, so they can just care for you and you not have to worry about your partner being present if that's important to you. The other part of that is, I'm a little grateful that that hard news came out, because that goes to show that there is everything on the table, as ugly as it feels, that there's now the ability to work with that. There's no secrets. And I don't know what that looks like for that couple, but I do know that healing and forgiveness, has to involve truth and light mixed in with that. And so whether that's healing and recovery or reconciliation, their therapist can help them navigate that. But I would say you're not alone. The pain you're feeling makes so much sense. But communicate, and don't be afraid to reach out. What do you have to lose, right? Get what you need, get the care that you deserve, and make sure that you can advocate and ask for what's important to you during this time.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
The next question, I think I have OCD. What should I do?
Yes. Oh, so many of us, it can kind of become a little bit of a joke to say, like, oh, I'm a little OCD with that. I like things
Right.
in a certain order.
Mm-hmm.
And however, OCD can also be like obsessive compulsive disorder, is what that stands for. That can be such a terrifying thing to kind of work with, because you feel so helpless. When that's your life, you feel helpless, you feel out of control. It involves having lots of intrusive thoughts, a fear, like intrusive. I actually talked about this in a previous episode, how intrusive thoughts aren't even usually characteristic of you and who you are. So they're even scarier. And to feel helpless, like you can't get those under control, it usually involves you developing like repetitive habits and rituals and things to make the fear and the anxiety go away, just so you can cope again, which then actually feeds the bad habit. It's a type of anxiety disorder, and it's like feeding a monster. And so we certainly don't want to feed any monsters. So the first thing I would recommend, as I have several times here today, is if you think this is you think you have OCD, reach out to your doctor, your psychologist, a psychiatrist, a counselor. Reach out to someone who is a professional in this area, because there's actually something really important here. If you just think you have OCD, it is very possible that you could. However, the symptoms of OCD are also very similar to symptoms of other disorders as well. And a lot of them are anxiety related. But Google is not always the most helpful, because it just opens up a whole world. So I say, go to someone who's a professional in this. Go to someone who this is their life's work and their research and their training, so they can help relieve your fears, and they can help figure out, is this truly obsessive compulsive disorder, or is it coming from something else, since it shares so many similar symptoms? And so just let's again name it so we can tame it. If you want the relief, you want to be able to tame all of the stress in your life, and where this is taking freedom away from you, let's get you to a professional. We have plenty of counselors and professionals at MyCounselor.Online that would be happy to assist. Or if you feel more comfortable talking to your primary care physician to get a referral to somewhere local, just my encouragement is to reach out so you're not alone. The second tip I would maybe give to go a step further is care for your body and your mind during this as you're trying to get set up for some help. Stress and isolation actually will exacerbate symptoms of OCD. And so it's important to work on stress reduction, get out and get moving, get your body flowing so that you can release and relieve the cortisol buildup, which is a stress hormone in your body. Take some really good self-care. And again, don't isolate. You don't have to be alone in this. It's nothing shameful. It's an anxiety disorder, right? Everyone has anxiety. Everyone has anxiety. And so just don't isolate, because that sends you alone again into that corner to deal with this yourself and to maybe even get caught up in this bad cycle where you're feeding this monster that's taking over your life. And so get the support of loved ones and friends and professionals so that you can feel healthier faster.
Thank you so much, Sarah. This has been very valuable. And I know our listening audience and those who are watching this will agree with me that this has been so good. A lot of takeaways that we can have. Hey, I just want to remind everyone again about the article. It's going to be in our show notes. You can go read it, and I would encourage you to go share it with your family and friends. And again, I want to thank you guys for asking those questions. It takes a lot to ask a question. And so thank you for your courage. And in you asking a question, you've helped so many other people. So I just want to remind you that if you have a question, you could submit it to MyCounselor.Online/ask. Again, Sarah, thank you so much for coming on to today's episode.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Matthew. And to all the viewers who send in your questions and show interest, you are so valuable. And so I appreciate this time today.
Yeah, it helps our episodes, and we really appreciate it. Again, I just want to say thank you for watching, for listening. Also, want to just plug our social media. I want you to stay up to date with all the latest helpful and encouraging content. Man, subscribe to our channels and follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on Facebook and Instagram with the handle of Love My Counselor. Again, Facebook and Instagram has the handle of Love My Counselor. Also, don't forget, we're on YouTube. You can subscribe and like our videos. There's tons of resources out there that you can go watch. We are at MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. Again, MyCounselor.Online Christian Counseling. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you so much for those of you who are watching and listening. And we can't wait to see you again for another episode of My Counselor Live.